Welcome to Crowdmark Sessions, where we bring educators together to explore innovative teaching practices and redefine learning in today's world. Join us as we dive into discussions that inspire and transform the way we think about education. My name is Michelle Caers, and I'm the host of Crowdmark Sessions podcast. I'm also the co-founder and CEO of Crowdmark, the leading grading and assessment system for education. Our mission and values of integrity, collaboration, and community are at the core of everything we do at Crowdmark. In this podcast, we'll be interviewing trailblazers from our community of educators to hear their perspectives on learning, technology, and the changing landscape of education. We've got a phenomenal list of guests that will be appearing on the podcast, and we look forward to sharing their ideas with you. Welcome to Crowdmark Sessions. The topic of our first episode is student mental health, and more specifically, how educators can help their students navigate learning in an increasingly complex world. With me today are Dr. Carolyn Junkins and Dr. Lindsey Daniels. I'm really excited to get their insights into this really important topic. But before we start the discussion, I'd like to share some eye-opening statistics on the state of mental health for students today. So in a national survey of Canadian post-secondary students using campus mental health services, 95% reported being overwhelmed and exhausted. 83.7% reported anxiety, and 86% were depressed, and 81% experienced loneliness. And I think this can be especially acute for international students. Things are not much better, if at all, in the US, where during the 2021 school year, more than 60% of college students met the criteria for at least one mental health problem, according to the Healthy Minds study, which collects data from 373 campuses nationwide. Just 40% of students think their school is doing enough to support student mental health, and 36% of students said they had been diagnosed with anxiety. When we look to the United Kingdom, in a 2022 survey by the mental health charity Student Minds, 57% of respondents reported a mental health issue, and 27% said they had a diagnosed mental health condition. This is evident in the fact that nearly 3/4 of students report feeling lonely, while 17% feel they have no university friends at all. These numbers are not getting better. The number of students seeking help at campus counseling centers increased almost 40% between 2009 and 2015 and continued to rise until the pandemic began. And this is according to data from Penn State University's Center for Collegiate Mental Health, a research practice network with more than 700 colleges and university counseling centers. Since the pandemic, things have increased even more. So if you haven't been following this topic, these numbers could be shocking. And clearly something needs to be done to reverse this trend. Today, we're going to speak with two university professors who take student mental health seriously and can share some strategies on how to mitigate stress for students. First, I'd like to introduce Lindsey Daniels. Lindsey is an assistant professor of teaching in the Department of Mathematics at the University of British Columbia. She completed her PhD in applied mathematics at the University of Waterloo in 2019. And completed a postdoctoral fellowship at McMaster University in 2022. Lindsey's research interests are in mathematical education, where she's focused on active and experiential learning, and leveraging computational methods to provide student feedback, support, and success in large enrollment courses. Welcome, Lindsey. And next we have Carolyn Junkins. Carolyn Junkins is an assistant professor teaching stream in the Department of Mathematics and Statistics at McMaster University. Carolyn completed her PhD in algebraic geometry at the University of Ottawa and has taught at Western University and Harvard University. Carolyn's research in math education focuses on using data-driven techniques to understand and improve student learning at the university level. Thanks for being here today. We're very excited to have you on our program to discuss such an important topic in education, student mental health. Before we get into it, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience and tell us who you are and what you teach? Let's start with Carolyn.
Sure. So my name is Carolyn Junkins. I teach mostly first and second year courses from calculus to linear algebra. And I also developed and coordinate a summer bridge program that helps students transition from high school to university, focusing on making sure they have the mathematical proficiency as well as effective study strategies and other transitional issues, making sure that they're feeling ready all around for their life in university.
Amazing. Okay, thank you, Carolyn. And Lindsey?
Thanks, Michelle. My name is Lindsey, and I teach at UBC, and I teach in actually both of the integrated programs at UBC, Science 1 and Mech 2. So Science 1 is a first-year calculus curriculum, full year, and the students take a variety of science subjects all integrated together. Mech 2 is the second-year mechanical engineering program, so this encompasses sort of what we normally call Calc 3 and 4, but vector calculus and multivariate calculus for mechanical engineers. And then I also teach a third-year or fourth-year course that is in math modeling. So a variety of different courses. I see a variety of different students during the year, all with sort of, I'll say, similar but different needs, and it's awesome.
Amazing. So we're going to really have a lot to talk about today with that vast level of experience and focus on teaching that you both share. So let's start with our first question, which is, from an instructor perspective, what mental health challenges are you seeing with your students over the past school year? And does this vary between first year and upper year students? Lindsey, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I would say not just in this year particularly, but I would say year to year. I think Caroline and I both can sort of attest to, we see a lot of anxiety surrounding grades and tests. Particularly in first year students, they sort of have this sort of, I don't want to say a rough transition, but it is different from high school, right? That transition from the high school setting into the university setting, it is different. And a lot of students find out that, what worked for them in high school doesn't necessarily work for them now, and finding avenues or strategies to sort of help them or help support themselves during the term and throughout the course, it can also be challenging on top of the content that they're already learning for the first time. We do see this sort of manifest itself in, they have a lot of anxiety towards, grades, they're not necessarily getting grades that they're sort of used to seeing. Tests in the university are often worth a lot more because we don't have them as often, mostly because we teach a lot of large classes, so it's not easy to facilitate, these really important assessments very often. And so we do see a lot of this sort of grade and test anxiety. I would say it sort of eases a little bit towards, the upper year level courses in third and fourth year, but we do sort of, for students that are perhaps looking at going to professional schools afterwards or grad schools, they might have a little bit more sort of anxiety towards tests and grades and making sure that they're sort of getting the grades that they feel that they should have. Another thing that I would say that we see across, I would say maybe all students, is this sort of feeling of like isolation and perhaps sort of an like imposter syndrome of, they see their friends or other students getting really good scores and they're not. So I don't deserve to be, like feelings like I don't deserve to be here because I'm not getting an A. I don't belong here because all my other friends are getting A's. I got a not an A on this test, so I clearly am not as capable as them. I would say, during COVID and the pandemic, when students were sort of isolated in that online educational environment, sort of really increased those feelings. And we haven't bounced back from that at all, which is another issue to try to navigate is, students were quite isolated in COVID. And so how do we get them to bounce back sort of to sort of in-person instruction. Things that sort of Caroline and I see sort of quite often in that regard are students are more likely to look online, so go to Google or YouTube to answer the question rather than asking for help from either her or I during office hours or after class, or even their friends. They would rather type into the Google search bar with their question. I also think that we need to be mindful of the fact that everyone experienced COVID pandemic and isolation differently. And that can also be challenging to navigate too, because it's often hard for them to relate to each other because their experience might have been so different than another student's with just in terms of sort of how they experience COVID. So it can be hard for them to sort of relate in that regard. And so again, that sort of feeling of isolation, I'm not like everyone else here, and sort of that lack of community can really be challenging for students. We also sort of see this, both Carolyn and I sort of, I would say, teach at sort of fairly large institutions. And so our first year courses are quite large. Just to give you an idea, for UBC, first year calculus has about 4,500 students in it. So it's quite a large course. And so even the upper year courses can also be quite large just by sheer volume of students that are on campus. And that can sort of create a feeling of sort of non-connectedness with sort of the course itself. Like you're one of 300 or 400 people in the course. And so it sort of creates a sort of disconnect in that regard. Maybe they don't feel like they belong in the course there. So I'd say like we do sort of see a lot of sort of similarities between students, just even across like first, second, third, and fourth year. And they're quite challenging to navigate.
Absolutely. That was a lot. Wow. So if reflecting on what you mentioned there's test anxiety, there's imposter syndrome, there's a transition from high school to university, which isn't always smooth for students. There's concerns about, will I qualify for my professional degree program if I'm applying after this? And we saw student mental health become a growing concern pre-pandemic, and then the pandemic just compounded a lot of the areas where students were struggling. I think the world over found COVID-19 to be particularly challenging. Carolyn, do you have anything to add on what challenges students have been facing?
I think only one more thing that I would add is that, even when there are supports available to students, like a student wellness center or extra help or student supports, it's hard for students to find those and navigate them. And not because there's no information, but almost there's just way too much information. Especially if I think of first year students in those first few weeks, they are just bombarded with hundreds of emails and it's too much. So they're almost, the students who are already feeling kind of that they don't belong or they're feeling a bit frozen are not able to seek out the resources they need or connect with the resources that they need, because there's just, the volume of information is way too much. So even if we have ways to help these students, it's hard to make sure that we find the students who need help and then also make sure that the students who need help are connected with the help they need.
Right. Yeah. Well, with those numbers, 4,500 students in one course. Was that a first year? You said first year calculus?
Yeah, it's first year calculus here. It's about 4,500 students, give or take.
It's incredible. And how many instructors and teaching assistants
a lot
are responsible for that large class?
I think instructor and TA wise, they actually were I think there's about 80 to 90 on the teaching team, which is quite a lot of resources.
Just a lot of management. Yeah. Wow, incredible. So the first few weeks of school, there's a lot to navigate, a lot to learn in every aspect of school, not just the subjects, but fitting into your dorm, figuring out what you're going to eat, who you're going to talk to, getting your friend base. Oh wow, yeah. I looking back, I can relate a little bit, but I would say that when I was a first year student, it was a simpler time. So what was it like for you as a student? If we're going to compare, for example, today versus when you were a student, because you were both students much longer than most of us, having earned your PhDs. So also amazing that, amazing accomplishment on your part. But how does your personal experience compare to what you're seeing in students today? Carolyn, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So I think I have kind of an interesting perspective because I'm now back at the institution where I was an undergraduate student. So I'm teaching math and stats to students who are in the same program that I was, students who are living in the same dorm that I lived in, eating the same food that I ate. And so it's really interesting to see how much things have changed and also what stays the same too. I think the biggest difference that I noticed is class sizes. The class sizes have really increased, and actually enrollment in math and stats in general has increased. And one of the reasons for this, I think, is that math and stats graduates have more diverse career options. So there are more people who are seeing math and stats as a pathway to a really interesting and fruitful career, as opposed to when I was a student, I think a lot of us saw math and stats as just something we really enjoyed. Just academically, we liked solving puzzles, we wanted to understand things. And so there's a big diversity in motivations that we're seeing with students, as well as their day-to-day. But even just why they chose math and stats is really different from when I was a student.
So I think new career opportunities have a lot to do with information technology and programming and just data in general.
Yeah, I think data is a huge side of things. We have a lot of students that are interested in actuarial sciences, which were, of course, around when I was a student, but I didn't really know about it. And then a lot of students interested in data science and applications of data science, from financial math to sports analytics to epidemiology, all those types of things where we've realized that there's a huge need for people who can think quantitatively.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when I was an undergraduate, and I went to Western University, so we had large class sizes for the time, but you only really noticed that the class size was really large when it was the class before the exam. So the class before the midterm, it was hard to find a seat. The class before the final, it was hard to find a seat, but otherwise it wasn't too bad. Does that happen in today's world?
I think definitely the class sizes fluctuate throughout the term. I usually see a good core group of students for whom they realize that going to class and attending and engaging regularly is really effective for their learning. So we seem to see that core group, but then things ebb and flow throughout the semester. And I think students have a lot of demands on their time as well. So they're making choices every day. And so the reason why a student might not come to class might be different. So you definitely see things fluctuate for different reasons.
Right. Okay. And Lindsey, what perspective do you have from when you were a student to what you're seeing with
so I would say, interestingly, for I went to a very small, I would say, undergrad institution. The university at that time had about 5,000 students. I think now it's grown to about 6,500 students. And so my first year courses were quite large, about 200-ish people split across a couple different sections. But as I got into second and third year courses, the numbers in math at least dropped to 10 people. And so I would say my experience was quite different than the experience that the students that I'm currently teaching are in, where even for the upper year courses, the third and fourth year courses sometimes have still 100-ish students in them. And so the sort of learning that happens in a classroom that's at 100 student to an instructor ratio versus I think in my last fourth year course in math, there was 4 of us. It was 4 to 1. It is different. And you really sort of get, I would say, a more sort of, I would say, personalized sort of experience of sort of what's the content, how does that fit in, the discussions you can have with the instructor are a little bit more sort of deep, and you really get to know them really well. Not to say that, the students that I do teach in the third and fourth year courses, you get to know them a little bit. But sort of the time that you have to sort of dedicate to a student is obviously different than if it's 100 versus 4, right? And so it is quite different. And it is sort of something I do think about, is how do I give the students that I'm teaching in third and fourth year courses the same level of experience that I had as an upper year math person when I was in a classroom with 4 or 5 of us. It's actually something that occupies my brain a lot, is how do I give them the same experience? Because I think that it's important to give students that really positive math experience in math.
It's such a foundational subject for so many careers that excite people today. So I think time management is a really big topic, and I want to talk about that a little bit later because I think it's really important to address here. But you just mentioned that you try to give students the same experience or some version of the experience that you had. What strategies do you use to help support better student mental health in the courses that you teach?
So I would say it sort of depends on the course and sort of what level it's at and what resources I can effectively offer to everyone, right? Because I want to be able to give everyone that same sort of opportunities that they have. So making sure that everyone has equal access, equal opportunity to access those resources is also incredibly important. I would say some of the strategies, at least that I use in the classroom for giving everyone the same experience, is being very clear about expectations in the classroom. So what do I expect from them, right? So usually it's coming to class, being engaged, asking questions when they need help, coming to office hours if they need to, setting very clear expectations of what I'm expecting them to do in my classroom is incredibly important. I also normally try to really highlight sort of the support that is available to them, both from myself as well as from the institution. And so at UBC here, we have a math learning center. I think, if I remember correctly, McMaster has something similar where they can go to the math learning center and they can get help from different TAs for different courses and things like that. There's, I believe, a peer tutoring network that they have access to. So really highlighting the resources that they have that are not just me, that they have access to, I think is incredibly important, and reminding them of those resources at strategic times during the term. So usually, a week or two before, I'll remind them, right, here's all the resources you have to ask questions for. After I return the assessment, okay, here's all the places you can ask questions and find help, and sort of really reminding them that these resources exist, and just making sure that they're aware of their options. And if I could eventually sort of have multiple of myself, that would be great. Don't think we're quite there with technology.
Absolutely. One of the things I recall from first year calculus was fear of asking a question in class. It was a very, very scary thing. The professor I had for my first year calculus was not welcoming of questions necessarily. And one time scolded a student. A young woman put up her hand, asked a question, and he said to her, "That's a silly question. If you need to ask that, you shouldn't even be in this class." And, when you hear that, that makes you fear even more asking a question. How do you encourage students to overcome that fear? Like, I would imagine the reason you're on this call, like your approach is very different than the professor I had.
I think that question resonates with me a lot because I was absolutely terrified to ask questions in first year, and I don't think I did. And now I have this expectation that I want all of my students to ask questions. And so I think really carefully about how I ask questions and try my best to make sure students know I actually do want them to ask questions in class. There's a few things that I've learned working in active classrooms that do translate well to huge classes. So we'll often ask true or false. I'll ask true or false or yes or no questions and ask students to vote immediately. Like gut reaction, what do you think? And if you have technology, you can use that. But I like to just have them hold a thumb up in front of them. Thumb up for yes, thumb down for no. And then also a gradient. So you could do thumb sideways for I'm really not sure. And that gives me right away an idea of how the class is feeling about things. And then I can sort of say, okay, we're not sure about this. What is it? Where are we getting stuck?
Okay.
And if it becomes sort of an us question, where are we getting stuck? Then they start to feel more free to ask those questions. Like, I'm confused here. I don't understand this. And I feel like we have more of a community feel that way. So I want students to ask questions at any point, but I also want to set up these opportunities where my expectation is for them to come up with the questions, like get out the questions that are already in their heads.
I love that. Thumbs up, thumbs down. It's like taking the virtual world into the real life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely, and it was helpful when we first came back from COVID as well, because I did get so used to that, asking students for their reactions on Zoom. And then we came back, and also all of our students and ourselves, we were still masked. So it was really hard to read facial expressions.
Oh,
and
right.
so I started to just try to get hand gestures, or even asking students, what does the graph of this function look like? Show me, and have them use their hands if they weren't comfortable using their voices.
Right. Amazing. That sounds really engaging and breaking down that fear. Absolutely. Do you have any other strategies, Carolyn, that you use to help support students, maybe around assessments?
Around assessments is a place where I think we can provide a lot of support. And this is something that Lindsey and I have done together when we've worked on courses, is finding ways to build effective study strategies and learning strategies into the course.
Mm-hmm.
I talked a little bit before about the overwhelm. I think when we ask students to learn all this content, and it's challenging content, we're talking about calculus, like that's just a fact. It is challenging.
Yes.
And then we're asking them to learn how to learn on top of that. It's a lot. And so something that Lindsey and I have tried to do is to build this into the course itself. So we might, and if assessment's coming up, we might give students an opportunity to pre-earn a couple points on their test by engaging with an effective learning strategy. Amazing. So for example, we had an assignment that Lindsey and I gave where we asked students to pick a topic that they were struggling with in the course and to try to describe it or find a connection to that topic with another thing they're learning in another course. So build some sort of connection and explain really transparently to students why connection building is an effective learning strategy. And then they would submit this. And as long as they submit this before the time of the test, then they're walking into that test with basically 1 point already. So it's sort of, I really enjoy doing that type of thing because it makes everyone feel good. You feel like you've already answered a question correctly, basically. Right. But also you're doubling down because by doing that little bit of extra homework, you're improving your learning. So you're probably going to do better on some of the other test questions as well.
Oh, absolutely. Like even when you sit down and scan the exam, you're saying, well, at least I got one.
Yeah, exactly. And students have said that to me too before. Walking in, they're like, well, it's okay. I know I got at least one. It's not a 0.
Yeah. Okay, great. And then any other strategies around assessment that you're using?
Yeah, so that can help at the beginning, so before an assessment, but we also have the other end, right, after the assessment. And I think something that also happens a lot, especially if it's the first assessment, especially if it's students' first assessment at university, is that it really didn't go very well for a lot of people. And that's where we start to see that a lot of avoidance behavior from students. They'll get that email back saying, here's your test score, and they might not open the email at all. Or if they do open the email, they might see the score, say, I don't want to deal with this, and just close it out. But we know that we all need to engage with that. The material's not going anywhere, right? We're going to keep learning it and building on it. So we want students to engage with the test, even if they're not so happy with their results. So this is another thing that we've done, especially in these large courses, is so bookending our test, we have a way to pre-earn a point, but then maybe you always have a way to revisit.
Okay.
And so then we can ask students to do something similar. Go through your test. First of all, open the test. Find a question that didn't go as well as you wanted. And now go back to your notes and find a theorem or a technique or something in your notes that would be helpful and try that question again. And this is sort of gives that little push that students might need to get over that barrier of the avoidance behavior and think about it. And then also, again, the hope is when that question comes back around on the final exam, now they've engaged with it productively. And so when they see it again, they'll feel more confident. They'll have the knowledge to answer the question, but it also won't evoke that fear response that, I didn't get this last time and I'm still not getting it.
Exams and grades are so stressful. So Crowdmark has a technology called Exam Matcher, and it allows instructors to take attendance and match students to their exams in real time. And we went to University of Toronto to try this out when we were just rolling out this new feature. And we were doing it in a real live exam. And I remember going to campus, finding the classroom where the test was going to be, and you could cut the tension with a knife. It was unbelievable. And I had forgotten how stressful it was. And I scanned the room and I saw some students who were reviewing their notes, those last minute, like, I just want to stay focused on the topic, and they're just turning pages and looking at study notes, etc. Then there were the other students who were just chit-chatting, nervous chit-chat about the previous evening, what they're going to do after the exam, this kind. And then there were the students who were just sitting there stone-faced, and, they weren't talking to anyone, they weren't doing anything. They were just anticipating, when can I actually get into the room? Then everyone finally got into the room, they sat down in their seats, and the exam started. And then you could kind of feel the tension go down a little bit, but it was still there the whole time we were there. And I just viscerally, I felt it. I was like, wow, this is it's really hard. So what kinds of things do you do to ease the tension and the anxiety, or the worst case scenario, a student does terribly on their exam? We had talked earlier in another conversation where you mentioned about scheduling office hours to be available for students. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can maybe answer that. So I would say one of the things that I think a lot about, particularly with returning assessments, is when is the best time to do that. And so, maybe 5 p.m. on a Friday is maybe not the best time to send back test scores to students, because they're in weekend mode. Just like, as instructors, we sort of have our, operating hours. I think it's fair to also give students their operating hours of, Monday to Friday. Like, we shouldn't be sending them emails, or at least in my opinion, we shouldn't be sending them emails on the weekend about school and things like that. That's their time. It's their decompression time. Just, if you can return it on Friday at 5 p.m., well, just return it on Monday at, 10 a.m. in the morning and things like that. So thinking sort of very carefully about when is that assessment actually getting returned can be quite helpful. Coupling that assessment with some additional office hours. So usually what I do is I try to return the test either the day I have office hours, or the next day I'll have a block of time for office hours. And so when the test gets returned, I'll say, have a look through your test. I've posted the answers. I've posted the marking scheme, if applicable. I've posted sort of, some thoughts about sort of the test, maybe what went well, what are some target areas that everyone can look into. If you have questions, like, come talk to me. If you're not comfortable coming in person, send it in an email. Like, being very open of sort of saying, whatever question you have, it's okay to ask, like, but let's chat. For sometimes particularly in the integrated programs, because you get to know the students a little bit, I would say, more closely than you do just a normal class. If they've done sequentially poorly on a couple tests, I might end up sort of reaching out to them and sort of saying, hey, are things okay? Is there anything that I can do to sort of, help you with, like, maybe pointing to some sections in the textbook, or, do you want to come in for an office hour? You can schedule an appointment and things like this, and sort of being very sort of open and transparent of sort of saying there is help. There are places you can go for help. I am one of them, but, if that's not comfortable for you, that's okay. Here are the other sort of resources that you have. And I will say, I do love the feature in Crowdmark with the returned assessments. There's the text box that you can enter in. And so oftentimes Caroline and I have both done this, both at McMaster when we were co-teaching a course, but we've put in sort of the mental health resources as well, that the students have access to, both either on campus or off campus, that are available to them. Just, as, again, a reminder that these resources exist. Here's how you contact them if they're needed. I mean, hopefully they're not, but that if they are needed, they're at least there in one place for the students to find.
Oh, wow. You know, that's so proactive. I think the idea of returning assessments when you have office hours available is incredible. It's also, you know, humans, we can focus on one thing. So we get our test back, we see the result, and we could be really happy, or we could be really upset about it. But in that moment, like, you want to take action, you want to do something about it. But then, you know, the day goes on, other things come into your life, you're very busy, you never know, and then it kind of slowly fades and declines, and you think, well, it's too late now, I might as well just let it go. So I think that's incredible that you do that. I think it's really smart and helpful for students. I can't think of anything worse than them getting their grades back at 10 p.m. on a Friday.
Well, and that's the problem, right? Like, if you send it after hours, where do they go? Because also, like, none of the instructors are on campus. A lot of the resources that they have access to are also closed at that time too, right? So, you know, there are some that are still open, but the sort of what they have access to, it becomes even narrower at that aspect, right?
Right. Being thoughtful about when you return assessments, grades, etc. And then you mentioned mental health resources that you include in a summary message when you return assessments. That's something I'd like to talk about a little bit later in the podcast as well. We're releasing a new feature to help support student mental health, but I don't want to get into that prematurely. So, Carolyn, did you have anything you wanted to add on to the last question about easing test anxiety or anything like that before we move to the next question?
I think the only other thing I can think of is to try to avoid any surprises that are going to happen when students walk into that room. Right. So I'll go so far as mocking up a practice test to look exactly how the test is going to look, you know, where they're going to put their name in, where they're going to put the student number in. If it's multiple choice, what does a bubble sheet look like? So that hopefully the only thing that is increasing their cognitive load is the actual work I'm asking them to do on the test. So they'll know what type of pencils or pens they can use, and just being really clear about that. Like, some students don't mind. It's fine. They don't care, and that's okay. But some students, it's very comforting to know exactly what the thing's going to look like, how many pages, what room am I going to be in. So the more that we can give students an opportunity to simulate the test environment, I think the better.
And again, that's such a good point. It's such a diverse group of students. Like, it's not a homogeneous group anymore. People are coming with all different approaches to learning and backgrounds and advantages and disadvantages. So leveling the playing field, I think
if you also think about those first year students too, a lot of them haven't written a test in that setting ever. And so it can be quite challenging for first year students because they're not used to that experience at all. And so giving them that sort of opportunity to sort of simulate their test environment can be quite helpful. And as an instructor on a teaching team, not assuming that they're familiar with those sort of procedures and policies surrounding like what happens in a midterm or a test, it can be helpful to help sort of guide what you do on the front end.
Absolutely.
Same.
I still remember my student number because I've written it on all my exams, and it's in my brain all these years later. Okay, so digital adoption and learning technology has had a big impact on education over the past 4 years. I mean, it's been a gradual thing, but with the pandemic, there's been digital adoption has advanced exponentially with online learning, all these different technologies. Everyone's trying to solve problems, make learning better. Is this good?
I would say it's
bad
both
for students.
And I think it really depends on how it's being used. So one of the things like I sort of really think a lot about for the classes that I'm teaching that do have like a technology piece to it is, does that technology use have a direct alignment with the core learning objectives of the course content? So for example, if one of the goals of the course is to be able to analyze a large data set, then having a technological piece of software or a computer is essential to that learning objective. And so if the technology has this sort of real tie in with a learning objective, then it can be, I would say, a good thing. Even for like Caroline and I, like we both taught at McMaster during my postdoc, and we've never actually met in person, ever. Yeah, no, yeah. It's always been
No way.
Yeah.
The technology was essential to be able to do that, and so it can also be really good for facilitating that collaborative sort of aspect. And if it's used appropriately in the classroom, setting up maybe a discussion board, it can really sort of help facilitate students, interacting with both other students and the teaching team. That is maybe a little bit more sort of approachable for them post-pandemic than doing that in person. So having another option or another place that they can go to sort of collaborate with other students, I think is good. Where it's maybe not so good is when we sort of, I'll say, foster a reliance on really expensive pieces of equipment or software, because that can be inequitable for students. And so looking for those open source alternatives for a lot of the software options that we use, say on a daily basis, sort of in math, a lot of the campuses will have campus-wide licenses for it. So if it's a software that is not a current campus-wide license, is there a department or a faculty that can get a campus-wide license for the students so that they don't have to front the cost for that? Because it can be challenging. Some of these pieces of software, the pieces of tech are expensive, and we want to be sure that all the students have the equal opportunity to not only participate but also learn using that technology.
Right, absolutely. Anything to add there, Carolyn?
I think one other thing to think about is how, if the technology does not directly align with learning objectives. So, right, like definitely we should be taking advantage of it when we can and emphasizing open source and available technology. For courses where it maybe doesn't align with learning objectives, then I think it's important to be clear and transparent with students that technology should not replace things like understanding or engagement. Right? Those are things that actually we want technology to enhance and not replace. So if we're recording lectures, for example, in big, large enrollment first year courses, we often record our lectures and post them to the learning management system. We want to make sure students know that that's maybe to go back and revisit something. Or I tend to talk really fast when I get excited about something in class. And so for some students, especially English language learners, they might slow me down on the recording. And that's a great place. Or they might use the closed captioning to go back and revisit what I said. But it's augmenting that engagement in class as opposed to replacing. We recently did a survey of our first year students here where we asked them, where do you go for help? And if I think back again to like my experience as a student, I would probably go to my peers first, right? But as demographics change and as we have more students who are commuting or living further from campus, then that's not always an option, right? They can't just go down the hallway in their dorm and say like, what did you do for number 3? I don't know. And so then the tendency can be that they'll look online and that's not going to have the same engagement. It's really passive to read something on your computer. It's really active to get in a discussion or get in an argument with a classmate about what the right approach is for a problem. And so I think helping students understand that, having the internet available to you with lots of good math questions on it shouldn't replace that interaction with peers. Instead, as Lindsey said, let's use the technology that let me FaceTime my peer if we're not down the hall from each other. And let's talk about it that way, or let's live edit a document together. How can we use technology to support the engagement as opposed to replacing engagement with peers and with instructors?
Right. Yeah, I can totally appreciate that perspective. What about like AI note-taking types of technologies? So students come to the classroom and they turn on their computer and it starts taking notes on their behalf. Do you think that's beneficial to the student, or do you think that they're losing something by not processing their own notes?
I think that's dependent partially on the student and what their learning needs are. So for some students, they need to be supported by an audio recording or some other type of recording of the class itself to be able to support themselves. And so I would say it really depends on the student and sort of what their learning needs are. If they're using it sort of, as Carolyn says, in like an active way, so it's used to sort of supplement or augment the things that they're already doing sort of actively in class to learn the content, then I think it can be a good thing. If it's more of like a passive, oh, okay, the AI is going to take the notes for me, I'll read it later. Well, is it actually going to get read later? Probably not. And if it is, it's not going to be the same as if they actively were engaged with the course and then revisited the note later. So I think it's sort of a really nuanced sort of question of, does the student sort of need a recording or some sort of support in terms of their own learning, and are they using it actively or passively?
One thing that I've heard others talking about, I'd be interested in getting your feedback on, is how to cut through the noise. So students are getting emails from the institution, they're getting emails from their peers, from their instructors, from the committees they're on, from their social clubs. They're getting, maybe not emails, maybe they're getting text messages. There are 1,000 apps on their phones. They're getting pinged all the time. How do you, as an instructor, cut through the noise and engage with them with technology in a way that's meaningful for them, that they will respond to?
I think that's a really tricky one. I think there's just so much noise out there, like you said. I think coming back to what Lindsey said about being mindful of when we contact our students, and I try to keep it as regularly as possible, right? So if we have an assessment, they're going to know when I'm likely to return it. And if I have messages I want to get out to the class, if it's not urgent, I'm not going to send that out at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. I'm going to wait. And maybe every Monday I send out, things like action items for this week or something like that. I'll try to be mindful so that it's clearly packaged. It's at an expected time. It's in an expected location. So all my announcements will be through the same channel every time. So there's not a question of, is she going to email me or post it on the LMS or do it this way? So try to be consistent and clear, and things like bullet points as opposed to long rambling things. And I think being mindful too that if we're teaching a course, and if we're lucky that that's the only course we're teaching that term, then maybe that is the majority of our day. But our students are not thinking about our course all day. They're thinking about 4 or 5 courses. They're thinking about their part-time jobs. They're thinking about their research placements, all sorts of things. And so keeping things right-sized, that my expectations of students need to be in line with how much time they're really able to dedicate to the course. And if I'm emailing them twice a day, every day, that's not reasonable communication.
Thank you. That is the perfect summary, really, of the time management that we kind of talked about a little bit earlier. And I was going to ask about time management when it comes to technology, because students just have so much going on. It seems, I feel, just being someone who works at a technology company, I've got, different software pinging me all the time. Sometimes I just have to turn it off. I'm sure students feel the same way. Okay, well, we're almost getting close to the end. I do have a question for you. Being that you're both really engaged with your students and you've been thoughtful about teaching and supporting them, can you think of a student that really responded positively to what you're doing or what you're teaching? Do you have a favorite moment with one of the students that you were teaching, that they came to you and said, "Professor, thank you so much for X," or "I appreciate that you did this. I've never had an instructor do that"? Can you think of anything that stands out?
Well, we're in the middle of exam season right now, right? So we're grading, and we also have lots of TAs that help us with the grading. And so just thinking, recently, a TA emailed me yesterday and said, "I tagged a booklet for you on the exams. The student left you a message." And so I went in to go look at the exam, and a student had left me a message, and they said, "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." And I love that I could see that, and that my TA knew I would want to see that. And that, in the stack of 300 exams, that message made it to me. Made me feel really good.
Wow. That's excellent feedback. That's incredible. Lindsey, do you have any?
I had a student actually in term 1 in one of the courses that I taught on. It was a revamped course of a math modeling course. So this is a 3rd-year course that the content and sort of the structure got completely overhauled. And at the end of the term, I had one of our students come up to both me and my TA, because my TA actually came to all of our lectures because it was really sort of active learning and group work and things like that. And I needed the extra support for the number of students I had in the course. And the student came up to both my TA and I and said, I really, really enjoyed the course. I think it's great that there was a team of women leading the course, because my TA was also female identifying. And they were just really sort of appreciative of the fact that they had some really strong female mathematicians at the front of the room in the course, and that they really had a really great overall experience. And so I thought that was a really cool comment, because I don't often hear that, oh, it was really cool that you taught this course, and I really like the fact that it was a female mathematician at the front of the room.
That is also really great feedback.
Yeah.
They say you have to see it to be it. So there you are, inspiring future mathematicians, which we absolutely need. I've heard similar things actually at Crowdmark. We have a very diverse team, and I've interviewed with some folks who said that they were very inspired by having a woman CEO. So I applaud you for both of those things. Okay, so I think we're going to wrap up. Thank you for your time today, Carolyn and Lindsey. Your insights are invaluable, and I hope that our community of educators benefits with what you've shared with us today. And just a small plug for Crowdmark. We take student mental health very seriously, and because we're so deeply involved in grading and assessment, we've recently launched a student mental health resource on our grading and assessment system. So when students log in to their courses page on Crowdmark, they will see a mental health resource section with information and links to mental health services that are available to them on campus. And each institution can customize the messages. The idea here is that we can provide help to students when they need it the most, which is during this really stressful assessment period, which in Canada right now is in April, is when everyone's doing their exams, or when they're receiving their grades. So everyone can learn more about this new feature at our website at crowdmark.com/support.
Okay, thanks, Michelle, for having us.
Once again, thank you to Dr. Carolyn Junkins and Dr. Lindsey Daniels for joining us in our first podcast.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks so much for having us. It's been fun.